Hey everyone, before we dive into this absolute rabbit hole, do me a solid, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. You're not gonna wanna miss a single video after this. And drop your wildest theories in the comments below. I read them all. Seriously, let's get this conversation started. Okay, deep breath. We're about to unpack one of the biggest, most fateful, most debated decisions in human history. A decision that carved the 20th century into a before and after. A decision that, from our comfy armchairs of hindsight, looks like the peak of human stupidity. Adolf Hitler attacking the Soviet Union. Everyone says it. Hitler was an idiot. He lost the war right there. Even modern Germans might sigh and say, he had his points, maybe, but attacking Russia? That was his madness. They even named the plan after a medieval emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, who drowned on a crusade. Poetic, right? A doomed name for a doomed plan. But what if we're wrong? What if, for a single terrifying moment in the spring of 1941, it looked like the most brilliant, logical, inevitable move in the world? What if you, with the same information, the same worldview, the same towering, arrogant confidence, would have made the exact same call? Stick with me. We're not just talking history here. We're talking about the perfect storm of ideology, economics, military calculation, and sheer hubristic madness. We're going to crawl inside the mind of a dictator at the peak of his power. We're going to look at the map on his wall, read the reports on his desk, and feel the dizzying rush of believing you are unstoppable. This isn't an apology. This is an autopsy, a psychological and strategic deep dive. And by the end, you might just understand how close the world came to a darkness we can barely imagine. Part 1. The view from the Summit Europe, 1941. Picture him. The man, the aesthetic, the sharply tailored uniform, the iconic hair, the stare that held a nation in thrall. He stands before a massive map of Europe. And my friends, it is a beautiful map. A masterpiece, painted in shades of fascist brown. Look at it. Poland? Gone, digested in weeks. France? Humiliated, conquered in a blitzkrieg masterpiece. The Low Countries? Swallowed. Norway? Denmark? Occupied. Yugoslavia and Greece? Brushed aside like irritants. Italy is his eager partner. Spain's Franco is a friendly authoritarian. Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria are aligned, eager for scraps from the table. Western Europe is under the boot or compliant. The much romanticized resistance? In 1941, it's a whisper. A few communists and idealists in basements. The people? Exhausted, confused, many passively accepting the new order. To them, Hitler wasn't just the screaming man from the newsreels. He was the leader who ended German chaos, built the Autobahns, restored pride. He loved animals, was a vegetarian, a war veteran. From a 1940 perspective, his PR was God tier. And the money men? Oh, they were on board. Big capital, German and international, had made its peace. The intricate web of corporate profit from rearmament, from seized industries, from the ghastly machinery of exploitation. It was humming. IG Farben, Krupp, Siemens, they were all in. The trains, as they say, were running on time and full of profit. There was just one little problem. The English Channel. Britain wouldn't roll over. The Luftwaffe couldn't win the Battle of Britain. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion, was a fantasy. So the British Isles sat there, a stubborn, defiant aircraft carrier, bleeding him, supported by a vast, unseen empire and, increasingly, by a sympathetic giant across the Atlantic. So Hitler stands there, master of Europe, but with his most dangerous historical enemy still unbeaten at his back. And his gigantic, pristine, battle-hardened army is just sitting there. What do you do with it? You can't just demobilize. That army is the engine of your economy, the proof of your ideology, the source of your power. An idle army is a dangerous thing. It needs a purpose. His eyes drift east. Part 2. The hungry machine, the economic logic of madness. Here's the part most people miss. This wasn't just about ideology or Lebensraum, living space. Though that was the gospel. This was about cold, hard, desperate economics. The Third Reich was a crackhead economy, and it needed its next fix. Let's talk numbers, and I'll spell them out like the Reich's accountants had to. Germany is resource poor. It has coal, sure. But the lifeblood of modern war and industry? Oil, rubber, manganese, tungsten, copper. By 1941, Germany's own oil fields were producing a paltry 550,000 tons per year. Its economy and war machine needed 6 million tons. Let that sink in. They were running at a deficit of over 80% before a single tank moved. Where could they get it? America was out. The British blockade was tightening like a noose. Their main source?
Romania.
From May 1940, the Ploiești fields started pumping. In 1940, they gave Germany 1.2 million tons. In 1941, maybe 3 million. Better. Not enough. Never enough. It was like trying to run a dragster on sips from a teacup. And it wasn't just oil. Everything was short. Germany had become the workshop of Europe, much like China later in the century, but a workshop needs raw materials. It had no vast colonial empires like Britain or France to plunder. The territories it occupied in Europe were themselves resource consumers, not abundant producers. But to the east, to the east, the Soviet Union had the Baku oil fields, more than the entire U.S. output at the time. It had the wheat fields of Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe. It had the coal of the Donetsk Basin, the manganese of Georgia, the industrial potential of the Urals. It was, in the crude Nazi calculus, a vast, unlocked treasure chest, guarded by what they believed was a rotten, incompetent lock. The economic logic was terrifyingly simple. Conquer or collapse. The war economy required perpetual expansion to live. It was a pyramid scheme of violence. The only way to pay for the last war was to start the next one and take what you needed. Part 3. The easy target, the military calculus. So the target is chosen. But is it wise? The German High Command, the Oberkommando des Heers, OKH, wasn't full of fools. They were the professionals who had engineered the lightning victories. And in 1941, they looked at the Soviet Union and liked what they saw. No, they loved what they saw. Let's break down their intelligence assessment, which was shockingly good, thanks in part to treason, complacency, and Stalin's own paranoid refusal to believe warnings. The Red Army was a mess. The Soviets had just been humiliated in the Winter War against tiny Finland, 1939–40. It took them 3 months and over 300,000 casualties to beat a nation 1/40th its size. The Red Army appeared bloated, poorly led, demoralized. Purges in the late 1930s had decapitated the officer corps. As our source text brilliantly puts it, colonels and majors commanding regiments had been lieutenants just a year or two before. This was an army led by terrified survivors, not seasoned commanders. Deployment was a gift. Soviet forces were stretched thin along the massive new border, hastily established after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact divided Poland. They weren't in defensive positions. They were in makeshift barracks, often right on the border. Tank divisions were isolated. Airfields were overcrowded, with planes lined up wingtip to wingtip, perfect targets. The infrastructure, roads, railways, was abysmal and couldn't support rapid mobilization or reinforcement. To German aerial reconnaissance, it looked like a disorganized camp, not a battle-ready army. The numbers game. This is crucial. The Germans thought in terms of divisions, the building blocks of armies. To defeat Poland, they used around 6 panzer and 50 infantry divisions. For France, they used 136 divisions. For the invasion of the USSR Operation Barbarossa, they assembled a force of 155 German divisions, including a staggering 19 panzer divisions right from the start. Plus, they had 30 divisions from allies like Romania, Hungary, Finland. That's 185 divisions, the most powerful invasion force in human history. And what did they face? Soviet forces in the western districts amounted to roughly 120 to 140 divisions, similar in raw number to what France had fielded. And France, remember, had the best army in Europe on paper. And it fell in 6 weeks. The master plan, Operation Barbarossa, they didn't just wing it. They planned it meticulously with General Friedrich Paulus, yes, the Stalingrad Paulus, helping to draft it. The plan was elegant and brutal, Use the panzer groups like giant armored fists to punch deep hundreds of kilometers behind the border. Encircle the Soviet armies before they could react or retreat. Destroy them in massive cauldron battles. Kesselschlacht. Then, keep moving. Don't stop. The goal wasn't to capture territory for its own sake. The goal was the annihilation of the Red Army west of the Dnieper River. They planned to destroy 40 to 60 Soviet divisions in the first giant encirclements, like the ones at Minsk and Smolensk, and another 20 to 40 in the next wave. Game over. Their timeline? 8 to 10 weeks. The war would be over by the autumn. Before the Russian winter. It had worked everywhere else. Why not here? Part 4. The ideological poison. Why they believed it would be easy. But beyond the graphs and maps, there was a deeper, more sinister layer of belief. This is where ideology fatally warped strategy. The Nazi leadership, Hitler at the forefront, genuinely viewed Slavs as Untermenschen, subhumans. They saw the Soviet state as a crude, Judeo-Bolshevik cabal holding a primitive people together with terror. Their intelligence analysis was filtered through this racist lens. One knock and the whole rotten structure will collapse. This was a common phrase. They believed the Soviet Union was a colossus with feet of clay. Once the Red Army was shattered, the people would not fight. They would revolt against their communist masters, welcome the Germans as liberators, a belief quickly shattered by Nazi brutality, or simply flee. There would be no partisan warfare, no national resolve. The ghost of 1917. They looked at World War I. Under pressure, the Russian Empire had collapsed into revolution and chaos in 1917. They expected a repeat. Stalin would be overthrown by his own Politburo. The various Soviet republics would fracture into squabbling ethnic groups easily dominated. A war of annihilation. This wasn't meant to be a traditional war with a negotiated peace. This was a Vernichtungskrieg, a war of extermination and colonization. The plan, General Plan Ost, called for the death, starvation, and enslavement of tens of millions to make room for German settlers. They weren't preparing for a long occupation administration. They were preparing for a slaughter and a land grab. So, put yourself in that war room in spring 1941. You have the greatest army ever assembled, undefeated, battle-hardened, an opponent that looks weak, disorganized, and deployed perfectly for your trademark blitzkrieg. An economic imperative that makes the attack a necessity for survival. A racist ideology that assures you the enemy society will implode under the first blow. A detailed, brilliant plan crafted by your best minds. Where is the flaw? From that vantage point, there is none. It looks like a sure bet. A lock. As our source provocatively says, it's a trap as reliable as Bitcoin. You'd bet everything on it. Part 5. The Great Unraveling, where the plan met reality. So what happened? Why are we not speaking German or living in a Nazi-dominated world? The plan crashed into reality. And reality had a name: the Soviet people and the sheer, incomprehensible scale of Russia. Depth and space. Germany conquered France by moving a few hundred kilometers. The distances in Russia were of another magnitude. A 300-kilometer penetration, which seemed deep in Europe, was just the first step in Russia. The country had a strategic depth that swallowed armies. Supply lines stretched to breaking point over dirt roads that turned to mud. The Rasputitsa, the rainy season. The German logistics system, designed for European distances, broke down. The Soviet capacity for suffering and mobilization. The Nazis fatally underestimated Soviet political control and nationalist resilience. There was no collapse. Instead of welcoming the Germans, partisans formed. Instead of surrendering in droves, encircled Soviet soldiers often fought to the death, buying precious time. The state did not shatter. It packed up its factories, put them on trains, and moved them east of the Ural Mountains, an astonishing feat of evacuation and industrial mobilization. The Asiatic horde myth. The Germans expected to face a finite number of divisions. They destroyed them by the dozens. At Kiev, at Vyazma, at Bryansk, they captured or killed millions of Soviet soldiers. And then new divisions appeared. Raw, poorly equipped, but endless. The Soviet Union could tap a manpower reserve Germany couldn't fathom. The 2 years to train a soldier rule didn't apply when the alternative was annihilation. They threw masses of men and machines into the fight, learning brutally as they went. The failure of the knockout blow, Moscow wasn't taken. Leningrad, though besieged, didn't fall. The Soviet command structure, after initial panic, stabilized. Stalin stayed in Moscow. The one knock didn't topple the structure. It just made it mad. Winter, the arrogant belief the war would end in autumn, met the Russian winter of 1941–42, one of the coldest in history. German soldiers froze in summer uniforms. Tanks and trucks wouldn't start. The Soviet Union, used to the climate, kept fighting. Conclusion: the tragic, inevitable mistake. So, was Hitler stupid for attacking the USSR? From our godlike view of history, yes. It was the mistake that doomed him. It created the two-front war he always feared. It eventually brought the colossal industrial might of the Soviet Union, and later the United States, directly against him. But in June 1941, it didn't look stupid. It looked like the only move left on the board. It looked like victory. It was the culmination of every racist assumption, every military success, every economic pressure. It was a gamble, but to them it seemed like a gamble with loaded dice. Understanding this isn't about sympathizing. It's about the most important lesson history teaches. Hubris is the ultimate poison. The belief in your own infallibility, the dehumanization of your enemy, the blindness to your own logistical limits. This is what turns sure things into catastrophes. The men of the Wehrmacht who crossed the border at 3:15 in the morning on June 22, 1941, were the masters of Europe. By December, they were freezing, exhausted, and staring into the abyss outside Moscow. The plan that couldn't fail did, because on the other side were people fighting not for an ideology, but for their homes, their families, their very existence. They fought with a desperate, brutal resilience the Nazi calculus could never comprehend. The subhuman Slav, the female-type people, the rotten colossus held, and then pushed back, and then, at unimaginable cost, marched all the way to Berlin. That, my friends, is the real story. Not of a stupid decision, but of a decision that seemed brilliant in a bubble of arrogance, and was shattered by the hard rock of reality, courage, and scale. If this deep dive into the twisted logic of history got your brain buzzing, you have to be part of this community. This is the kind of analysis we do every week. We tear apart the myths, crawl inside the decisions, and understand the why behind the what. So don't be a passive viewer. Subscribe right now. Every subscriber tells the algorithm this is content that matters. Ring that bell so you don't miss our next breakdown. Maybe we'll tackle why Napoleon made the same mistake, or the real story behind the Cuban Missile Crisis. And most importantly, let me know what you think in the comments. Was it inevitable? Could Hitler have won if he'd done something differently? What's the biggest lesson we should take from this? I want to hear your perspectives. The conversation is what makes this channel alive. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and I'll see you in the next video.